Nobody wants to talk about it. Everyone's afraid of it. Everyone thinks that encryption's sacred and it shouldn't be compromised, and I 100% agree. And
hello, everybody, and welcome to Techlore Talks. Today, I am really excited to invite back on my good friend John Ozbay from Cryptee to discuss a very sensitive topic. So I ask us all to make sure that we go into this in a proper mindset. We're going to discuss some exciting things along the way, like Cryptee announcing end-to-end encrypted photo sharing, which is something they've held off on shipping for a long time. They are an open source end-to-end encrypted photo management and document management platform, and they have now finally shipped sharing. You might be wondering why that took so long for them to do, and this is overall what we talk about. We talk about their implementation, but we also talk about their hesitation, involving things like CSAM and other concerns they have. We're going to talk about the legal and ethical considerations while still balancing user privacy and some innovative solutions that John has created at Cryptee to try to balance these two things. In this interview, we're going to talk about something quite sensitive in the privacy community, which is the relationship between end-to-end encryption as well as CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material. This is something that in the past has not gone too well in our communities, and I hope that this conversation can be a good starting point for us to really begin anew and actually have good conversations around this. I ask us all to be sensitive in the comments, as some people may be impacted by things like CSAM, and this is something that I wish all of us keep in mind when we think about privacy, encryption, and the other complexities in the world. Without further ado, let's get into the interview. All right. I am really happy to bring back on John Ozbay from Cryptee. John's been on here before. I'll let you properly introduce yourself in a second. But John, we had a phone call, or you texted me, a few weeks ago saying that you guys had a new release at Cryptee. And you had to do a lot of explaining to talk about the nuances of end-to-end encrypted photo sharing in context of chat control, in context of CSAM. And I think you said, let me just explain this to you in a couple sentences. And I think it was like 10 minutes later, I was still just listening to you explain this.
Sorry, not sorry.
And so, but it got me thinking, this is actually a really interesting topic because this was a common discussion on our forum back in the day before it was archived of people talking about how to balance CSAM, for those who don't know, child sexual abuse material, with end-to-end encryption, if that's a real concern at all. I know there's some takes online that that's just not really the provider's responsibility, but you actually run an end-to-end encrypted service, and you recently just released photo sharing. And so this was something you guys had to discuss, and I kind of just want to start by really laying out what we discussed and why we're here. And so I really wanted to open up this conversation as hopefully something for all of you to think about. I don't really know what to think going into this. I haven't made any conclusions, so I just want to hear what John did and maybe ask questions to see how things work. Is that a good starting point?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great starting point.
So do you want to just quickly reintroduce yourself for those of you people who might listen to you for the first time here?
Yeah. Sounds good, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm John Ozbay. I'm the founder and CEO of a small end-to-end encrypted documents and photo storage service called Cryptee. We've been around for a very long time now, almost 8 years. And for the longest time, we did not want to ship sharing for various legal reasons. And we decided that now might be the perfect time. And we've been sitting on this for almost 5 or 6 years now at this point. So it gives me great relief to say that we're finally ready to ship sharing for your photos and your videos. And a lot has happened over the course of the last 4 to 5 years. And we had to keep our code base up to date so that we can one day flip that switch and enable sharing. But finally, this week felt like the right week. And I texted Henry saying, you're never going to believe what we're about to do. And Henry was kind enough to help me on this podcast. And so I'm very happy and grateful.
Yeah. So do you mind expanding? You started building this 4 or 5 years ago, and you guys have been secretly, I guess, behind the scenes maintaining it. But what were the reasons back then, and even, I guess, as of a month ago, maybe, why were you not shipping it? Do you mind expanding on some of those reasons?
Well, so we first had a long call and chat with our legal team. And we're talking 5-6 years ago. And long story short, they basically said there are a bunch of legal edge case scenarios that we should be extremely careful of if we are to do any end-to-end encrypted sharing and distribution of content in general. Doesn't have to be photographic content. It could also be like documents and whatnot. Essentially, we were just told, be extremely careful. And when we asked for details, just explain to us, run me through the scenario, One big scenario that they flagged, especially with photos and video sharing, was, and this is to put some perspective around pandemic era, 2020, and politically everything was kind of difficult in the United States and around the world for that matter. Our team basically said, look, there is a really strange edge case scenario. Say, for example, someone's spreading CSAM on the internet and they have an account with Cryptee and they share this with 5 other people. And let's say a law enforcement team from the United States catches one of the recipients, and this person gives them their key and says, here it is. Now, the law enforcement has access to the content and they can see this content. But in the United States, by law, including the FBI, no one is allowed to send that key to someone else. The only party they're allowed to send this is the National Database of Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. That's the only legal party that they're allowed to send this to. So if FBI discovers one of these recipients and this key is in their hands, FBI legally cannot send us the key to say, hey, we've discovered CSAM on your platform, and here's the key. You can go verify it or something. Can you please take this content down? They cannot send it to us because that would constitute legally as sharing CSAM for them. So they are not allowed to do that. So they can't share the keys with us. And to be honest, I don't want to have to worry about employing a content management team that has to go through with the incredibly brutal task of having to look at the CSAM material, CSAM content in general to be able to say, hey, this is indeed CSAM or this is not CSAM. And we cannot decide. We can't be the arbiters of that decision either. And NCMEC is basically at least in the United States and in Northern America, the correct party to do that. So we thought this is a problem because if they cannot share this content with us and if we can't verify because everything is end-to-end encrypted, then how do we know that what they are asking to take down is in fact CSAM? What if it's police brutality that someone in the United States documented and the United States legal law enforcement is saying, hey, we want you to take this down. They have access to the recipient's key, but not the sharing party's key. And if they're asking us, hey, like, we need you to take this down, we would need to somehow be able to verify this. Otherwise, we're taking their word. And it was a lose-lose scenario, because if we take it down and if it's police brutality, we're effectively backing down on our promise to do our best for reporters around the world, to do our best for war photographers around the world. But if we don't take it down, and if it is in fact CSAM, then we are hosting CSAM and we're all going to go to jail. And that's not great either. So we thought, okay, this is a bad lose-lose scenario that we need to think very thoroughly about and figure out how this is going to pan out. We don't want this to become a thing where we are doing the wrong thing and we're acting kind of like Silicon Valley and sort of like releasing our code fast and breaking things and breaking the society. We want to do the right responsible thing and take our time. So I thought, let's just take our time. Fuck it. We have nothing to lose. We just need to do the right thing here. And I didn't want us to unleash something onto the internet that we're not comfortable with. And over the course of the years, what happened is, I mean, fast forward now, multiple years in, I started going to Brussels a lot more often for various reasons, which you've mainly discussed about in the context of Apple, but there's also other topics like browser choice and also European digital rights and digital sovereignty. So I ended up doing a lot of trips to Brussels and ended up talking to a lot of these regulators from the European Commission, from the European Parliament, also to civil rights organizations, to human rights organizations, to women's rights organizations. And the more I ended up making these trips and talking to these people, the more I understood and had a better picture of what everyone is actually afraid of. And I feel like CSAM is one of those, I don't want to say difficult topics, but one of those thorny topics, pun intended, that nobody really wants to talk about. And especially coming from a company like Cryptee, where we're talking about end-to-end encryption and making sure that everyone's data stays safe, the automatic question that a lot of people ask is, how do you make sure people don't spread bad shit on your platform? And they're right. That's perfectly fair to ask. And I thought that it's very important that someone just sits down and talks to the regulators and talks to these human rights organizations and talks to these civil rights organizations and psychologists and sociologists.
Because chat control especially is very, very big.
Especially chat control. Exactly. And chat control has been sort of like this dark cloud looming all over Europe for a very long time now. And thankfully, last week, we finally killed it for good, it seems. And I thought, okay, I want to just talk to everyone, understand why they're so afraid of this particular thing, and what can we as tech companies do about it. It was very important for me to be able to say, hey, I want to do the right thing, and I'm doing the right thing. So tell me what you're worried about, and I'm going to find an engineering solution to this problem. Because I believe that it's not the fact that it's end-to-end encryption that scares a lot of these people. It is something else. And the more I talked both to the regulators and to the civil rights orgs, the one thing became clear is that what they're afraid of is not one person sharing CSAM with another singular person. What they're afraid of is mass spread of CSAM. So if you think about sharing CSAM with one person to another, one could put it on a USB flash drive and mail it to the other person. There is no way to detect it, stop it. It's effectively invisible to the law enforcement, and then someone could just do peer-to-peer sharing. That's not the scenario that they're most afraid of, because that's already been around and that's very difficult to prevent. What they're worried about is people just uploading CSAM to a website and then posting a link to the dark web with thousands of people downloading it. That's the scenario that they want to get ahead of. And they don't know how to address this. The one scenario that they can keep thinking of is like, well, there's all these chat apps, there's all these social media platforms like Facebook and Google and iCloud and whatnot. And realistically, these are the most popular vectors for CSAM to spread. People just upload bad shit on these platforms, and it's very easy to spread it to thousands of people, and that's how it happens. And so they basically said, hey, if you can build this in a responsible way, where it is almost more impractical for someone to try to use Cryptee than it is for them to use any other fucking means of distributing CSAM, chances are they're not going to use Cryptee. But you need to make sure that barrier's so fucking high that no one in their sane fucking mind who wants to share CSAM would use your platform. But anyone who wants to just share their family pictures with 4 or 5 people would do so. And that was sort of like a awakening, oh my God, I finally understand what these people are afraid of moment, because up until this point, there was always this rage around the topic of encryption. Everyone's like, no, zero compromises. It's like, yeah, we're not going to make compromises. We just want to do this right, and yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel, just not to cut you off, but I just want to make sure we're not, we kind of like dive into these things a little bit more here. So I think in our initial very quick call, when you were kind of explaining things to me, you mentioned how end-to-end encrypted services and someone having bad content on their own platform, let's say, that's not being shared around, is no different than mailing a flash drive to a friend. Like, no one's going to be opening up the envelope. No one's going to be analyzing what's on there, especially if it's an encrypted flash drive. But that's not the real concern. The concern is in that analogy, the equivalent would be like hosting a theater event where hundreds of people are coming to go watch a movie. And that's what is the worst problem and most preventable as well. And that is what you're saying is the issue, is just the accessibility of the content and whether or not you're actually building a platform, rather than, obviously both are problems and it would be awesome to deal with both of those issues. But it sounds like the biggest issue is that latter one, which is...
That is correct. Widespread, mass spread. And essentially, to go with your analogy, like if we're talking about a theater, right, you invite 100 people, then those 100 people leave with their own video copies, and they get to have a 100-person theater event, so to speak. And that's what they're trying to get ahead of, because there is an R vector to this, and you want to keep that as low as possible to prevent the spread of bad stuff on the internet. That's the ideal scenario, at least.
So what you're saying is, yes, encryption makes it harder to moderate, which is
correct.
Probably not, that's not a debatable thing. It is debatable if the moderation is, and breaking end-to-end encryption is worth it, which I think we can talk about soon here. But the main issue you're saying is the shareability of it, which leads me to my next question for you, which is, you mentioned the Silicon Valley companies, Apple, Google, they all have photo providers. They all allow sharing. In fact, Apple does have ADP, which is end-to-end encrypted, and it still enables sharing. You can do like a public shared album on Apple. So how are like regular big tech companies handling this? Is it still an issue on their platforms because they still have the shareability concerns, even though they don't have the encryption for most users?
To the best of my understanding, now I can't speak for the tech companies because I don't know how their process is behind the scenes. But to the best of my understanding, what companies like Apple can afford to do is throw lawyers at problems. And essentially, Apple trusts on the fact that something like 0.5% of their users probably enable advanced data protection. And of those, we can, let's say, speculate, I don't know, 10%, 5% of it maybe actually uses it to spread CSAM, whatever. There's probably a percentage that we don't know. I'm making this up right now. And they probably arrived at the conclusion that this may be a tolerable number given their multi-billion user base. But companies like Google Photos, for example, they are not end-to-end encrypted to the best of my knowledge. Therefore, they could just scan the images as they please and essentially shut down accounts beforehand. So they can probably use things like AI-based fingerprinting, and they can use solutions like PhotoDNA developed by Microsoft and the NSA, and they can use a bunch of solutions to sort of fingerprint these existing images. But this sort of wouldn't work in the context of end-to-end encrypted sharing, needless to say. So I can't comment on what the big tech companies do, but they have enough legal firepower to throw at these problems that smaller providers like us cannot do, so to speak. And a good example is like Apple's legal budget for the DMA hearings is $1 billion. So that's just for the DMA alone. And they can throw an obscene amount of money at problems, and I think that's the solution that someone else can't do. So that's how I see it, is that if we did this, there would be no way for us to get out of this. If Apple does it, they will probably be able to find a very expensive solution to get out of it.
Yeah. Can you explain maybe a little bit before we get into my next questions, why the end-to-end encryption prevents your ability to do this? I know you guys can't. The whole point of end-to-end encryption is that only the account or whoever they share that account with, whoever has the decryption keys can view the data, which you guys in theory shouldn't have because you're end-to-end encrypted. But what about I know Apple had the whole thing about local scanning on devices. Theoretically, could an end-to-end encrypted service still do local scanning without compromising the end-to-end encryption?
Now, they could theoretically do that, but they would be compromising the scanning algorithm. Now, the thing that a lot of people are afraid of, and we looked into this, just to be very clear, to understand what is it like that everyone's trying to market around, and what's this thing that everyone's saying, hey, we have this incredible pre-encryption scanning, whatever magic solution that, of course, doesn't work, needless to say. What these scanning solutions do is they've scrapped together a bunch of AI algorithms, and essentially they've tried combining things like age detection and nudity in the same algorithm. So they basically try to score an image saying, hey, is there an underage person? Is there some nudity in this? And maybe some context like, is this a photo of a kid on a beach type of thing? And they try to eliminate some false positives in a terrible way. And needless to say, that's not what all CSAM is about. And every single activism and every single human rights group and every single women's rights group and children's rights group that we talked to said, that's not what all CSAM is about. There's a lot worse stuff than that. And so you can't just casually detect with that. There's gore. There's all sorts of other things. There's, not to get into super gory and boring details here, essentially, it just doesn't work. You can't just do that. And the other alternative to this is to use something like PhotoDNA developed by Microsoft and the NSA, which essentially fingerprints against an existing database. The problem with that is that their hashing algorithm for these photos need to remain private. If you ship it in your front end, then suddenly people realize, oh, if I upload like 10 photos and do this edit and do that edit, it doesn't detect, and you can essentially brute force your way through the hashing algorithm and it loses all effectiveness. So in order for PhotoDNA to be effective, it needs to remain private. You can't just ship it with your client. So needless to say, we're never going to be able to ship any solution like that, or any end-to-end encrypted provider who prefers to have their code open source like we do will never be able to do that, because it effectively kills the whole point of the hashing algorithm, as someone's going to reverse engineer that and defeats the whole point. And you can maybe ship it as a compiled version with the app somehow, and it's still not going to work, because then someone's going to capture the network traffic tomorrow and figure out what it's actually uploading, and that's game over also. So none of these pre-encryption scanning things that they're trying to sell, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's just really broken in general.
How do chat apps right now kind of handle this? I mean, so here's, we always dive into this in other contexts when people ask, oh, do you like Telegram? I say, no, I don't like Telegram, because Telegram by default doesn't have any end-to-end encryption in groups or channels, and you have to opt into it for even regular DMs. And it puts them in this really interesting position where now you actually have to trust Telegram a lot more than you have to trust something like Signal, because
Yeah.
Now Telegram is holding your data, and you have to trust them to respond to legal requests, and you have to trust that they're sticking to their privacy policy.
Yeah.
Signal, you don't really have to trust them as much because
Yeah.
there's only so much they can do, even if they wanted to get access to your messages. So
Signal's amazing. Yeah. To the best of my understanding, they don't, first of all, but they do things that are very similar to what we've implemented in our platform. Well, Signal handles it by means of not storing anything. That's a solution, right? It's ephemeral. You send something, Signal just forwards it to the next person, and then it's gone. It doesn't stay on Signal servers.
So that because your sharing is more permanent is actually where the problem arises. I see.
Correct. Because we are the storage facility. By law, we're not like when you're transiting something, it's kind of like you can't keep the mail service responsible for sending the flash drive, right? They didn't know what's inside. So
because you guys are a photo storage provider.
Correct. Exactly. Then we become liable. So WhatsApp is a bit more liable because they actually do store encrypted content on their servers. But to combat some of this, they have recently implemented solutions like limit the number of users who can be in a single group, limit the number of times an image can be forwarded, etc. And I think that is effectively the solution, and that's what we've arrived at also. And I suppose this is a very long way of getting to the solutions that we come up with to sort of address this problem. But
before we get there, one final question here, because Signal recently released end-to-end encrypted backups, and WhatsApp also has backups to their own servers. Is that not storage? How do you view that?
It's different because your backups are not meant to be shared with someone else. Your backups are for you.
Again,
so it's no different than it's the sharing aspect basically that becomes a problem. So you're more liable to this problem if you're a communications provider of any sort. It could be messaging, it could be photo sharing, whatnot. But if you're just doing personal backups, it's no different than putting your hard drive in a storage facility in the city somewhere. Like it's there.
I want to touch on the solutions, and then after I want to zoom out and just ask more broadly, philosophically, like the philosophical angle of this, right? Because I feel like it's a very touchy subject. I don't like talking about it,
Absolutely.
but I feel like it's something that's not discussed.
I don't think anyone does. And I think that's the difficult part is that nobody wants to talk about it. Everyone's afraid of it. Everyone thinks that encryption's sacred and it shouldn't be compromised. And I 100% agree. And that's the thing where it's like we have this inherent issue around nobody wants to talk about.
So I want to get to that and the solutions. But last question before we dive into the solutions, and also we talk about chat control later too. I know you can't. I know you probably do have discussions with other providers that care about privacy and security out there.
Yeah.
How much is this considered? I feel like when people
heavily.
Like when people think of Signal, when they think of Tor, when they think of all these services, they just think, wow, they just built a private and secure service and they're just rolling out new features as they're ready to build them. But how much, this isn't talked about. No one talks about this. So is this secretly something that every team behind the scenes is taking into consideration when they're rolling out their services that they just don't want to talk about publicly?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, I can at least say this. I haven't spoken to any other founders about this particular topic in depth, but I have spoken to some founders who had companies that were dedicated. Like one of my really good friends who used to be my neighbor, she started an OnlyFans competitor, and we had a very extensive 2.5-hour podcast session about this and how she gets ahead of all this. And she's an incredibly brilliant person, and I'll send you the link if you wish to share the details of that podcast. There's a very long, extensive conversation we had about this. And long story short is that I think for companies that matter, they do hopefully think about it. Within the framework of chat control, I do know that pretty much every messenger service out there thinks about it extensively, and it's a big concern for them. To give you one very short personal experience as an example, where a couple months ago I was in Amsterdam, and as I'm walking on the street, and this was right on the week of the chat control vote. I think I sent you a message when it happened too, but this was the week of the chat control vote, so I was on my way to Brussels. And I was in Amsterdam. And literally on the street, outside of a cafe, I bumped into Mary Beth Whitaker, president of Signal. And I said, like, hey, how's it going? And we very briefly, for like 2 minutes, had a conversation. And the entirety of those 2 minutes were about chat control. That says something. And Maribeth was like, we got to do something about this. And I said, yeah, we got to do something about this. And that was the week where I was flying around like a headless chicken crazy, running around trying to talk to every regulator that I can talk to. And I told Maribeth, and I think I told you, like I've spoken to everyone in Estonia and Finland that I can speak to try to get the countries to line up as much as we could. And thankfully, Meredith was talking about that too, and she was very much concerned about that too. And yeah, everyone was thinking about that at that time, and still is thinking about that. I think after this week, hopefully.
Yeah, I want to talk. Let's put a pin in that. I want to ask you more about the regulation aspect of things, because I know a lot of people are wondering why that needs to happen. You just do your job, just roll out good tech, roll out good encryption, and bury your head in that. So why take all that time to go to process? But I want to talk about that because I think it's probably going to lead to some interesting discussions. Now, I want to get into your solution and how you guys approach this, because you're not compromising on the encryption aspect of things. So I'm going to assume that it's a sharing thing. I actually have, you sent me a couple test albums and they expired before because I've been ignoring you on Signal because I've just been so busy this week. Yeah, send them to me again. Because you have some photos from when I was there visiting you. So you're sharing these photos of me. What does this look like now with the way that you're implementing this in Cryptee?
So okay, we decided that there's got to be a healthy framework that we set to figure out what it is that we want to address first. Let's figure out like what is everyone afraid of and what can we do to actually address these things. And the first thing that we decided is, okay, we don't want this to be spread en masse. This needs to be a solution where you can easily share it with your family. You can share it with your client. If you're a war photographer, you can send the photos to your editors, to your news organization. The idea here is to just make it so that you can very easily share with the number of people you would want to share, but not spread it en masse to very large numbers of people. Now, if you want to do link sharing, that just automatically complicates things, because how do you verify the number of people visiting that link? So do you set it just to IP addresses? Well, then how do you deal with people using VPN services? What if they all use the same VPN? Well, how do you do, like if it's like a one-time visit in that browser, what if your client couldn't open it on their desktop but wants to open it on their phone or their whatever other browser and whatnot? Like that's a problem. That's not going to work. So after going through a bunch of iterations, we thought, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this, because we also don't want people to just have to worry about hoarding links somewhere that they received. And there's got to be a better way to just sort of make this more permanent and easy for people to access. So we thought, okay, why don't we just make it so that the recipients of the links have to enter their email address. And once they verify their email address with a one-time password, then we know for sure that only that email can access that album. And that's it. That email is added to the recipient invitees or the recipients. And that way we know there can be maximum 5 email addresses that can receive an album. So if you have a family, that's enough. If you have an editor, that's enough. If you shot wedding photography and you just want to send it to the bride and groom's family, 5 is enough. Like we realized that's a very sufficient number generally. And if you went to a party with your friends, like 5 is probably enough. Like, and please contact us if you feel that 5 is too small and we'll make it 10. But basically the point is that 5 generally felt like a very healthy number. And we thought email verification should be fine, right? If you're a wedding photographer and you're sharing photos that you shot at someone's wedding, you wouldn't mind your client adding their email there. Or if you're sharing photos as a war photographer and you send it to New York Times, like you wouldn't mind if someone put it at NewYorkTimes.com email. That's not going to change anything. And if you share it with your friends, it's totally fine. You already have their email address. But if you were trying to share CSAM as a recipient, you would probably question what the fuck if you had to enter your email address and verify and send it to the person sharing it. How do you know if someone's not trying to bait you into something and catch you something? And we thought this could be a good way to actually prevent a little bit of the bad stuff, because you will have no way of knowing who the person sharing this is. And maybe you're being baited. You will have no idea. So it inherently raises the bar. This is the type of bar raising that I was talking about earlier, that if we make it difficult enough for people who wish to share bad stuff on our platform, they will simply just not do so. And they will use significantly simpler alternatives to do so. And when they do, we reach our goal. So that's how we decided, okay, 5 recipients, everyone has to verify their email address. And when you do enter your email address, we assign a token that's valid for 6 hours. We assign it to your IP address, and we assign it to that email address. And all these things happen behind the scene, and we try to simplify it as much as we can. And To add to that, the sharing parties, the original source of the content, has to be a paid user. This allows us to make sure that free users cannot just sign up and create tons of accounts and try to mass spread the content that way, but instead allows us to limit the person who would be sharing this to one, or let's say two if you happen to have two cards and you created two accounts that way. But the idea here is that we can actually use payment methods as a means of also KYCing our customers to say, hey, we cannot see your photos, but we need to know that you are a real human and not a bot creating 1,000 accounts. If you have a payment method on file, that sort of establishes that. We don't need to see your photos to be able to prevent bad stuff from happening if we can just prevent bots from signing up and sending thousands, or if we can stop you from creating 1,000 accounts and spreading that way. So that's sort of the solution that we arrived to. And also, if you're trying to spread CSAM, the last thing you would want to do is probably actually give your payment information and billing information to a service. If something goes wrong, we can then report it to the law enforcement, and that raises the bar yet again. So that's sort of the solution that we arrived. It's like only 5 people. There needs to be emails. The sharing party needs to have a payment method. And to make it even more difficult so that you can't just post a link in the dark web and let anyone join this thing, links need to expire, or at least the invites to the links need to expire after 48 hours. So if you didn't accept the invite, I can create another link and just give it to you. That's okay. But that link expires again in 48 hours unless you accept it. If you do accept it, you can continue to access it forever. So if you think about it, you just send the link to your mom accepts it, she can access the photos, problem solved forever. She's going to have access to that, no problem. But if you decide to post that link in a dark web forum, it's not going to live longer than 48 hours. And that's sort of the point that we're trying to address here.
So the link is almost like a Signal username. Like it's
Right.
just meant to add someone and you can change the username afterwards and you're already
Correct.
linked at that point. Okay.
Correct. That's the idea. And you can revoke the link at any point you want. So say, for example, you wish to share private photos with your partner. That's totally fine by us, right? But let's say you broke up with your partner and you don't want them to have those private photos anymore. Then you should be able to very easily revoke that link and get your access back. And we thought that the most important thing for us right now, after having spoken to both women's rights organizations and children's rights organizations, consent is the key word. As long as you're sharing your photos and videos and your consent is still there, that's good. If you wish to revoke that link, consent is the key word. You should be able to revoke that link and it should be gone instantly. So that's basically how we built this, so that if you revoke the link, it's just gone instantly and you can share the link again if you want to, if this makes sense.
So this isn't for quick sharing. Like I feel like people think of photo sharing and they think, oh, I met this person at a conference and now I'm just going to get them a link and I'm going to share with them these 10 photos I took. Theoretically, that could still work, but I feel like,
it's just as simple as you give them a link, they enter their email address, and that's it. They have access to those links now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Like everything that happens behind the scenes that I've just described is actually...
It is pretty seamless, it seems.
It's pretty seamless. Basically, you get a link, you just type your email address, and you have access to it. That's it. And the process is actually simpler than the WeTransfers process, for context. With WeTransfer, you have to enter your email each time you send, and the recipient has to enter their email each time they receive. In our case, you just have to create a link to whatever album you want, and that's it. The recipient just enters their email and accepts it.
So when you, let's say someone is new, they've never used Cryptee before. I'm at a conference, I have these 10 photos, I give it to the person, they have to put in an email. Is that creating a free Cryptee account, or is that just to access? Oh. Okay, so that's just to access. But then where do the photos go? Because the link will expire in 2 days.
The link is essentially the same, but the invite expires after 48 days. So
then at that point, it's linked to the email, and they can, how do they access the photos after 2 days?
With the email address. Basically, whenever they want to access, they just do the one-time password with that email. So if you did it on your browser and then you want to do it on your phone, you just enter your email on your phone, you get a one-time password, and then
are they logging into Cryptee? Is that what's going on?
They're just accessing the album with a one-time password using that email.
Okay, but
and the link has the encryption key. That's the key.
So they are saving a link somewhere. There is a link to the album but the invite link is separate from the actual permanent link to the album.
They're the same link.
But you said the link expires.
So the invite portion of the link expires. Essentially, if you want, I can do a simpler explanation, but basically when you send a link, let's say you receive that link. If you don't accept the invite to that link within the 48 hours, you cannot accept the invite any longer. But after 48 hours, if you've accepted it, you can continue to access the images from that link. There is no separate links involved, basically. It's the same link.
And if you already have a Cryptee account and you put in your Cryptee email, does that add it to your Cryptee account?
Not yet, but coming soon.
Okay.
So basically what we're working on now is the ability to be able to simply click one button and say, hey, I'm already logged into Cryptee. Just add this to my account. And you don't have to enter your email. We already know who you are if you're logged in. And it's going to be as simple as literally just open in my Cryptee account and it will be permanently there. You won't need the store link.
Whose storage is that quota being used against?
The person who shared the album. So essentially the photos are stored in, let's say the photos I shared with you, they're stored in my account and I am giving you access to those files. That's how we're designing this. So if I revoke it or I delete those files, they're gone. You don't get to have a copy of it because that assumes that I am removing the content of someone else accessing it, basically.
I see. That's cool.
That's the way we designed it.
Yeah. Okay. So the big thing that comes up actually, and this is maybe a little mini rabbit hole that we should have to go down before we kind of zoom out again. A lot of the things you brought up don't sound very privacy respecting, just at first glance. And so I want to touch on these things. You mentioned first off requiring an email. Like it's not just an anonymous link that anyone can access. I understand the context, right? Like we've been talking about CSAM and everything. So I understand that, but payment method as well, like it needs a paid account. And so I guess I would ask, like, is it a problem? Because you mentioned like a New York Times reporter needing to put in an email. Do you see a concern with that? And would it make it any easier for Cryptee to potentially notice that like certain accounts are tied to journalists and put you guys in more or greater liability, and that could also implicate any kind of journalists on your platform if there is that kind of data. So I'm kind of curious what the privacy implications are of everything you shared there.
So good news is that we wouldn't know who the sharing person is. So if you have a Cryptee account and let's say you're a war photographer, right? We still don't know who you work for. We have no clue, no idea. And otherwise we would have your payment method just to be able to store your photos anyway. That doesn't change anything. And as for the recipients, let's say the recipient is New York Times. That doesn't mean I, the sharing party, actually work for New York Times. It could be that I am just sharing photos that I took during a protest with New York Times so that they can publish it on their newspaper. That doesn't mean anything like I work for the New York Times. It could just be that, let's say you, Henry, went to a protest somewhere in the United States, took a bunch of videos and want to share it with a bunch of news organizations, and you shared it with Wall Street Journal and New York Times and whatnot. Doesn't mean anything. So it doesn't mean you work for those organizations, and we won't know who you work for. All we know is that one person shared an album with another person. But we just want to make sure that there's only two persons. And the only way to ensure that we could come up with is using email. Because if we use IP addresses, again, VPNs could be a problem. If we use only email addresses and don't bind them to IP addresses, then what happens is that what if you just create one email inbox and thousands of people just use that email inbox? Like, that's a problem. So from our perspective, if we want to prevent the spread of CSAM en masse while still respecting your privacy and your security and keeping your content end-to-end encrypted, this seemed like a fair compromise to say, hey, if the people who you are sharing these images with are your family, that is completely fine if they use their email addresses. So 90% of the users who will share the photos with their families, it's good. If you're a war photographer, and we had calls with various different war photographers, one of which is from Finland, and I'm very happy to say that he's been an avid supporter of everything that we're doing. He was in South Sudan and he went to Ukraine and he was telling us like, hey, this is how we think you should do it. He seemed to be okay with this idea. We fact-checked it with a bunch of other war photographers with the United States just to be on the safe side that this is not just a European concept and maybe the Americans are more sensitive. But no, it seems that they understand and they say, hey, look, this is completely reasonable that my editor would need to put in their email address. If they're so concerned that we would find out, then the editor could just put in a random Gmail address and we won't know the New York Times. So it's very simple. And if they want to use a burner email, fine by me. The whole idea here is that it's binded to an IP address and we know it's one person accessing it, not multiple people.
Yeah, so I think the clarification here, and actually we do the same thing in our Plexus app, the open source app that you can get from F-Droid. Is how you score like de-Google apps and see which ones work, so you know before you move to a custom ROM what apps work. But we also require an email, and pretty much we don't care what the email is. You can use an alias email. It literally doesn't matter. The whole point is that there is at least a unique identifier to mark yourself
Exactly.
down so that we can prevent people from spinning up tons of bot accounts
Exactly.
and then just spamming ratings onto this platform. Like, we have to keep the ratings
Yeah.
legit.
I mean,
it's a very different implication, but it's kind of the same problem, actually.
exactly. I mean, I don't love it, but we don't have a better way of identifying people on the internet. So for as long as email lives, and I hope email lives forever, I think email is amazing. It's interoperable. We don't have to worry about, oh, I want to send you an email from Gmail to Hotmail, but sorry, they don't interoperate. I can't email you from my Gmail to your Hotmail. Like, there's no such thing. It just works across providers, right? So for as long as email lives, I think this is going to be a great solution. And if you're very concerned about your privacy, that, hey, like, I cannot share my email with you for no fucking reason, never, ever, then get a burner email. Geez, if that's your threat model, you should have a burner email anyway. Like,
I was going to ask you about aliases, because I assume like privacy.com would work, like alias cards, alias emails. The point isn't, and this is, again, the same thing with Plexus on our ends. Like, the point isn't to try to identify people. We just need some way to verify that like 10 ratings came from one person, not...
Correct.
So
exactly.
that way we know if one person is spamming we can just shut that one down.
Exactly.
Which I don't think we've had many problems with. I think that system has actually prevented a lot of the issues.
I mean, look, privacy.com, as great as it is, they also have limitations. They stop you from creating more than 5 accounts on the same platform, if I remember correctly. So they have limitations for the exact same reasons. They don't want their platform to be abused. So everyone's trying to do the right thing, and everyone's trying to put some artificial limits to prevent abuse. And there is a lot of abuse. So this is the best solution that we could come up with. I don't love it. I would have rather made it so that you can just make one link and anyone on the other end can just access it freely, but the world is a horrible place. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people trying to use these types of platforms for awful things, and I don't want to take part of it. So the way we decided to go about it is, it may not be the most privacy sensitive way, perhaps, if you have to give a payment method and an email. But then if you want to store your photos on Cryptee, and if you want to store more than the free plan, which is 100 megabytes, you're going to have to give a payment method anyway. And if the recipients want to receive anything, be it on WeTransfer or on WhatsApp, they're going to have to give a phone number or an email. And I would rather that it's an email than a phone number. So I think it's a lot nicer.
Yeah, maybe, before we zoom out a little bit here, just threat modeling in general. I feel like this, I wasn't going to name call anybody, but I think it's quite relevant because Proton had the recent activist who they were forced to hand over. I don't even think it was direct. I think it was indirect. I think the FBI tapped on the Swiss authorities. The Swiss authorities demanded a specific user account from Proton, and they were able to get some basic information about their payment method, and then sent that to Swiss authorities, sent it to the FBI. But of course, the headline was, FBI, Proton just gave information to the FBI, which is willy-nilly. But I think this is the same thing. There was a really good article put out from Freedom of the Press about this incident, which pretty much said, like, Proton is not anonymous. Here is like the actual threat model that they're accounting for. Yeah. And it talks about how Proton has never jeopardized end-to-end encrypted emails. Like, that is always something that they've stuck to. They've never handed over email content, but they've handed over an IP address. They've handed over recovery email in the past. They've handed over payment information. These aren't things that they promise to keep safe, but it's a threat modeling question. And so I don't know how this ties into you. Like, how do you view the threat model of a Cryptee user, and what realistically a user can and cannot expect? Because I think those are healthy expectations to set for users.
We have a lot of this documented on our security page. I highly encourage everyone to go take a look at that. And we have a privacy policy. I think that is so simple that we have 2 chapters. There's like one for lawyers and one for humans. So you can go very simply read what we keep.
They're not humans.
Lawyers are not humans. Trust me. So basically, you can just go read our privacy policy and hopefully get a better idea about what we keep and what we promise to encrypt and keep safe, and what we cannot keep encrypted. Like, we can't keep your payment name encrypted because, like, that's not something we keep in the first place. That's our payment processor, Stripe, for example. So there are things, and the same goes for Proton, right? Like, they use Stripe under the hood. So at the end of the day, their payment processor also has to have these names. And I know from having spoken to Andy, and we do exactly the same thing. So if you essentially work with us or with Proton, or I think most privacy respecting services, we essentially don't give your real email to Stripe, and we give an alias email to Stripe. if we can, where we can, and where we're able to, unless you want like a special billing address to receive your emails. But the whole point here is that that's not necessarily a vector in and of itself where you could be identified. And no one, this includes Proton, us, Signal, anyone, right? We are legal entities and we operate within the framework of law. And there is this thing called mutual legal assistance treaties. And we have to obey this if we receive an international court order legally. And it would have to go through multiple different courts. And that's literally the reason why I moved to Estonia to start Cryptee, because it's got some of the strongest privacy protections in place. We do not have key disclosure laws, unlike most other European countries, like Germany's got a more sensitive situation. No one can come to Estonia, pass a mutual legal assistance treaty paper and say, hey, we want your courts to issue an order to Cryptee to give us access. And essentially, Estonia can only enforce us to say, hey, we just need you to give the most basic whatever unencrypted stuff that you have access to, and that's it, because we don't hold your keys. We cannot give anything else. So we're in the same position as Proton, right? If someone comes to us and says, hey, you have to legally obey this, it's a criminal court order, there's a criminal order issued, so we have to obey it. And to put it in a different perspective, if someone gave you €3 a month and said, hey, I want you to break the law for me, would you do that? You wouldn't. So no one's going to. Neither us nor Proton nor any other company is going to break the law for you for €3 a month. If you're Apple, you have billions at your disposal. Maybe you can break the law and get away with it because you can afford to pay for it. And they do. Same with Meta. They just get a fine, a slap in the wrist for like 5 million, and they can get away with that. But in our case, that's not the case. So if someone comes to us and says, hey, we need you to give access to everything you have, that's going to be your email address. That's going to be your account meta information, which is like the last time you logged in, for example, which is something we have to keep for your security to make sure that we can keep your account safe, or things like the IP address so that we can make sure that while you're logged in the United States, someone doesn't try to suspiciously log into your account from Czech Republic. Like, that's not cool either. Someone needs to be able to take a look at it digitally and see, hey, this doesn't look right. Henley normally accesses from the US. All of a sudden he popped in Czech Republic and something's fishy here. Maybe your phone is stolen, but there needs to be a system that can safekeep your account as well. And these are all compromises, right? We also want the security aspect of things. So we tried to find a middle ground, and our promise to our users is that your data is always encrypted. We don't hold your keys, you hold your keys, and we're going to do everything we can to keep your account safe. That's the best we can do. That's the best Proton can do. And under any law framework, under any legal framework, that's what any company can do. Unless you live somewhere on a pirate boat and you just declared yourself completely lawless. But like, I don't think you should trust them to keep your data safe.
Yeah, I'd be curious how their servers work on the ocean.
Beats me, Matt.
Maybe easier to cool. Like you can strap the servers on the bottom of the boat, and like water cooled servers.
I have a very tinfoil hat theory that I haven't verified or talked to anyone about, but I think the hype around let's send data centers to the satellites to space and all that hype somewhat has to do with that, because it would technically be lawless. But
okay, that's very possible.
But a company on planet Earth would still need to operate those satellites, and they would still need to be under some legal jurisdiction. So there's some gray area there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. More questions keep coming up. One thing that came up, what are your feelings? I think I briefly mentioned this at one point. Mega, the end-to-end encrypted cloud provider, which also has pretty good photo support. I use them for photos for quite a while. They have end-to-end encrypted sharing via a public link. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And actually, on this note, it's funny because Mega was criticized in the past. I think it was like a semi-viral Reddit thread accusing Mega of not having end-to-end encryption because they were banning accounts that were spreading CSAM using their platform. When Mega cleared up, they said, well, these are public URLs. Like if you're sharing a public URL, even if there's an encryption, like the encryption key is literally in the URL.
In the URL, exactly.
So it's not really end-to-end encrypted once you have a public link. So I don't know if you have thoughts on kind of the way they approach that, and what that looks like. Yeah.
There is no public sharing with us. So I can at least say that with us, it wouldn't be the same, because the idea is that you share the link with someone else and only that other person can access it. That being said, if you grab a Cryptee photo sharing link, which has the key in the URL also, and then you just go and post that link to your MySpace account because, that's what's fashionable, then if we end up running into that link, yeah, of course we can see the contents. If we do see it within the first 48 hours, because then after that, the invite will expire and we wouldn't be able to access it either. Only the person who verified their email and added into the system will be able to. But I
guess the better question is, why didn't you go with Mega System? Like, what issues do you have with that system, and why doesn't it align with what you want?
Mass spread. We just didn't want our system to be used for mass spread, potential use of mass spread of CSAM. Because if you can spread images with a link, it could potentially lead to unlimited number of users being able to access those images. Then all it would take is to share a CSAM album. You just grab a link, post it on a forum, and that's it. Thousands of people can access it. That sort of defeats the purpose of trying to prevent mass spread. So our goal here is to clamp down on that and limit it to maximum 5 numbers of users, and that's the whole email thing.
Yeah, and I think, if I was running a service, even if, because I'm thinking, like, if I'm running Henry Photos and then encrypted photo provider, if I did the public sharing method, I'm good. That sounds like a lot of work. And I mean, yeah, we have our PeerTube server. We host videos, man. But it's completely cool. My moderation platform, or my moderation protocol for our PeerTube, no public account. Like, it's just for our content, because I'm not going to deal with moderating that for similar reasons as you guys. But if I ran this service and, I started getting reports, like, let's say we had a reporting system, like we maxed it out. So if we noticed more than 100 downloads on a file, we can set up algorithms. We can try to automate this. We can do a lot to try to prevent this kind of problem. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get around you and your team needing, like, I would need to have either myself or a team member or a whole team dedicated to having to access those links to see if it's actually appropriate content or not. And so now, you have to have the moderation teams, and we've seen the mental health issues that come from, like, these big tech companies that have, they outsource this to third world countries and people there who already aren't, like, in really a great situation, and they're having to look at this, and they have done studies on these people, and it's like disastrous to their mental health. It's like permanent damage. It's just a nasty problem to deal with. So that's why I would probably avoid that. But I don't know how they handle that. I'd like to ask them.
Huge reason why we don't want to ever deal with that either. And I don't think anyone wants to. And look, we're based in Northern Europe. We have extremely high quality of life standards. I'm like in a situation where I would not want to put any of my coworkers or any of my team members in a situation of, hey, someone needs to look at CSAM. Like, that's just horrible. Nobody should ever have to do this. But if there ever comes a point where someone needs to, it should be trained professionals. It shouldn't be us who have no training, no psychological training or support. It should not be us. And if there ever comes a day where we have to have a team, then I would also have to hire a bunch of psychologists to train and support the staff. It's not going to be just the staff who does this. I would want for each person who does the support to be a dedicated psychologist or a therapist to be able to assist them. And it's not an easy situation. And I don't think anybody should ever have to do this. It's pretty horrible. And I think the solution to this is to try to prevent mass spread of this. And that's a big start. And if we can all do our best to try to clamp down on that, the world would be a much better place in the first place.
Yeah. So, finally zooming out, as I was promising we'd get to at some point.
We're doing good.
What liability, and maybe this is more philosophical, or more of your personal views here, do encrypted services have liability? Is there anything wrong with building a tool? I mean, I think Tornado Cash is maybe a decent example here. So Tornado Cash was I might get some of the details wrong. My understanding, it was a mixing service on the Ethereum blockchain, I believe. And the idea is you can send funds into Tornado Cash and it spits it out, and it essentially mixes those funds so you don't know where it came from. It's a privacy service to make cryptocurrency a little bit more private. Yeah. Those guys, both of them, I believe they got thrown in jail, or at least they were tried, but I think they were arrested, and that's still an unfolding case. But did they have liability, right? Like, if it was, let's say, just 1%, I don't know what the exact amount was. They cite different numbers, but it's just for the example, right? What liability do developers have when it comes to the software they're building? And is that their decision? Is that their problem? Why do you see a personal liability building a service? How do you grapple with this? How do you think other people might grapple with this?
Let me reframe the question, because
Please.
I think liability and responsibility are two different things. Being responsible and legally liable are two different things. Maybe there is no law that regulates me to do certain things, but I should still have a moral responsibility to do the right thing. And I think this is the most important distinction here, is that there are countries where the age of consent is so fucking low that it almost makes you question the meaning of the word consent. And there are countries where the age of consent is high and they respect people's consent. And what I'm trying to get to by saying this is that I don't want to be the arbiter of what the legal age of consent is, because every country has a different number, right? But it's very important that whatever the law says doesn't matter. I have a moral responsibility, aside from the legal liability. And it is that I want to do the morally right thing. I don't want to do just what's legally okay and just move on and just wash my hands and think this is fine. The best way to look at this, I think, is to perhaps use a physical analogy rather than a digital one. I think encryption is a dual-use technology, right? You can use it to keep personal data safe, but you can also use it in militaries to keep military communications safe, etc., in the context of war, or to harm someone with it, to distribute bad content with it. So encryption is dual use. But guns, for example, are not exactly dual use. It's just built to kill or to harm people. A similar analogy is knives, right? There are kitchen knives you can buy from IKEA to cook and feed your family. And you can exactly go to IKEA, buy a large kitchen knife, and hurt someone with it. Does this mean IKEA should be responsible for anyone who ever attempts a knife murder? Like, I don't think so. I don't think it's IKEA's responsibility if someone buys a kitchen knife and kills someone with it. But this doesn't mean to solve this problem, we just go around banning all sales of kitchen knives. We're also not saying, hey, we're going to ID every single person who buys kitchen knives at IKEA either. Like, that's not a solution either here. And that's somehow...
Maybe if we age verified kitchen knives,
exactly,
it would solve the problem. I mean, you know what I saw this morning in my RSS feed? A company wants to age verify vapes. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going, you know the meme where men will do X before going to therapy? You know this meme? Like men will literally, and then it's like something ridiculous before going to therapy. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, we will literally age verify a vape before holding vape companies accountable. We will literally verify, or like age verify every platform in the world before holding big tech companies accountable. Like it is so, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. That just came to mind.
No, totally, man. I mean, but that's exactly what I'm getting at, is that I don't think IKEA is responsible for selling a kitchen knife. In the same way, I don't think we're responsible for selling another dual-use technology like encryption. So what we do is we store your photos and secure them with encryption, and someone can use it for good or bad in the same way someone can use a kitchen knife they bought from IKEA for good or bad. So that's the distinction. If we were selling guns, it would be inherently bad. And I think we should ID everyone and raise the age limit for guns and maybe actually do a mental sanity check, at least in the United States. Like in Europe, we don't seem to have this problem, but just saying. So what I'm trying to get to here is, I don't think beyond that moral responsibility to do the right thing, to make sure that we do everything within our power to make sure that our platform is not used to spread bad content, and put restrictions in place to make sure we have the reasonable pipelines to comply with the law. If someone comes to us and says, hey, this needs to be taken down, we can take it down, but do so in a responsible manner where we tried our very fucking best to make sure that someone can't spread bad content on our platform. That is the best we can do. And unfortunately, that's not even the tip of the iceberg for just how bad the situation is for the opposite of the spectrum, which is like Facebook or Google Photos and whatnot. There is millions and billions of CSAM material being shared on these platforms, precisely because it's open for everyone and anyone and everyone to upload content. And they're not doing this type of due diligence. So it's all about doing what we can, the very fucking best we can, to hold that moral responsibility bar as high as we can, even if the legal or, I don't know, lawful frameworks of Europe or Estonia doesn't require us to. They don't tell us, hey, you need to have this, and this type of checks in place to be able to do end-to-end encrypted photo sharing. They don't. There is no law that really requires us to do that. So we don't really need to do any of those things, but we want to do this because this is the right thing to do. And to that extent, yes, we are liable. And I think we should, and all platforms should, be held to a higher standard so that they do the right thing. And not because the law requires them to, but because it is our moral responsibility. So if I make kitchen knives that also have fucking lasers and laser guided aiming and whatever, and it is very clearly a murder weapon and not just for cutting cucumbers, man, I don't know. Like, that's the line where it gets really blurry. So I just want to be very responsible with what we do. And I would like to think, after having spoken to enough people, that we're trying our best, and I think we're doing good. But I do think the bar should be a lot higher. And I think platforms should be held to a greater standard where all these civil rights groups and women's rights organizations and children's rights organizations should come to us and say, hey, we need you to add this other thing to make this a bit better. You don't have to compromise on encryption, but we would love if you could just do this too. And that's the kind of dialogue that we're open to and we want to have. And we've spoken to as many as we could, and we want to speak to as many more as we can so that we try to cover all our bases and hope to be able to do the right thing here.
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what the thread was called. I just remember there being a pretty hot thread back on our forum before it was archived. Someone came on our forum and pretty much asked, hey, how do we actually talk about the CSAM problem? How do we all feel about it? It was kind of just a vibe check, and someone was kind of expressing and having some of these thoughts of like, hey, like, what if these encrypted services do have this negative side to them? Is there something that we should be doing about this? Is there something we can do about this? AKA, is there some legitimacy to the whole idea that encryption can harm children? And it wasn't a productive thread, I think. Like, a lot of people were very absolute in saying, like, no, we cannot fight encryption. This is not our fault. This is not our problem. Bad things will be done. And, you know, I'm sure you can imagine how that went.
Yeah, and to pause you for a second, encryption is not what harms children. It's the people who use encryption that harms children. And in the same way, it's not knives that harm children. It's people who use the knives that harm the children. We don't put knives into jail. We put the people who use the knives into jail. And yeah, I think it's an education problem, not exactly a technical problem to solve.
So how can people who are listening to this, who are maybe they've already been thinking about this, or maybe they're listening to this and going, wow, I disagree with all of this. But either way, how can people engage in a discussion from here on out in a way that's less awkward and that appreciates the complexity of the situation? How can people, because I would like to think after this is recorded, because I'm learning a lot from this as well. I'm trying to, like, we had like this 10-minute spiel, and now we've been recording for over an hour now. If our forum was still live and someone made this thread, what would you suggest that discussion looks like now, both for someone who's posting the thread and somebody who's responding to it, to have a productive discussion about this?
Look, I think the harshest thing I've learned is, after having gone to Brussels and having spoken to the regulators and having spoken to these experts in women's rights orgs and children's rights orgs, one thing became clear that wasn't clear for me in the past, which is just how bad the situation is. It's not as light or as simple as we think it is. The severity of CSAM on the internet is a lot worse than we realize. And it's getting worse progressively. These rights groups are monitoring the situation. And I'm not talking about law enforcement. I'm talking about women's rights and children's rights organizations. These don't have the inherent instinct to, hey, we want to do widespread surveillance. Their goal is not to do surveillance. They're not law enforcement. They're not a government. They're just people trying to help kids and women. It's bad. It's really, really bad. And we don't wake up every day and have to deal with the reality of a horribly broken internet where people share CSAM en masse with millions of people, but they do. Every morning, in the same way you and I wake up and open up YouTube and maybe grab a cup of coffee and watch a home renovation video, they have to go to work and spend 8 hours having to deal with CSAM at scale of millions. And they just see how bad it is. We don't. So understandably so, there is this gap between people who don't see that side of the internet and people who do see that side of the internet. And it's a massive communication gap because nobody wants to talk about this topic. Nobody really wants to bring this topic up. It's one of those things where it's like, it's dark, we know it, we just hide it under the rug and just move on. And I think it's horrible that the internet is this broken and we don't have this conversation, especially as tech founders. And when I sat down to try to talk with the folks in the European Commission, when I sat down to talk with the folks with digital rights orgs and others, and especially during the heat of the chat control debate, there was an inherent eyebrow raised moment where they were like, why are you asking these? Like, what is it that you're trying to sort of gauge here? Like, it's bad. But I was like, look, guys, I understand it's bad, but just how bad? Like, because that matters. If it's one person in the whole world that we're worried about, like maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's not that bad. But if it's millions of people, it's bad. And if it's billions of people, it's fucking out of control, right? So there's got to be a scale of
severity.
Just how bad. It's severity. And I think it depends on that. If we realize, hey, there's 8 billion people on the planet and 4 billion of them are abusing children, well, we have to do something more drastic about it. But if it's, I don't know, 100,000, a million, whatnot, then we should think about compromises and figure out how to solve this problem in different ways, perhaps because maybe encryption itself isn't the right way to solve this. So once I went to talk to these people, to regulators, to digital rights organizations, to civil rights organizations, it was then I understood just how bad. And that was sort of the awakening moment for me, because as a tech founder who's in his own tech bubble and in his own friend group where things are jolly and we don't have to worry about these types of things day to day, I don't know just how bad it was. I don't get to see these every day, so I had no idea. And I don't think any one of us do. Hopefully none of us have to do this unless you're a content moderator. Then the more power to you. Thank you for keeping the internet clean at the cost of your personal sanity. It's pretty horrible out there. And this is the type of thing that I think I didn't realize. And to address your question, I don't know what the right set of questions to ask are or the right kinds of conversations that we should have around this topic are. But I think it has to do with education first. We all have to first be educated to understand just how bad it is and go from there. In the same way we started to, thankfully, in our generation, have the conversation around mental health issues. And slowly people are becoming more and more aware of mental health issues. And perhaps our parents' generation didn't have as much in-depth of an understanding of mental health issues, and they're now becoming more aware of the situation. I think that this is the same kind of conversation that we need to start to have, to say, hey, this is an ongoing issue. This is a widespread problem, and we need to do something about this. And only then we can maybe start to understand, okay, these are the types of conversations we should have. These are the types of compromises that we should have. Maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't know, ADHD wasn't as well understood, right? We didn't know how to accommodate people with ADHD. And now we understand it a lot better. We have a lot better dialogues around it, and we have a lot better solutions around it as a result of those conversations. So the way I see this is the same. It's an issue that we need to talk about, ideally at scale, and everyone needs to be better educated about it. Everyone needs to have a better understanding about what causes this and how we can solve this and how we can address this in the interim, in the meantime, so that we don't have to worry about a much worse problem coming into the next 10, 20 years until we can actually find a solution to address this problem. So yeah, I would say that education is perhaps the first step. In the same way we manage to educate our societies not to go around stabbing people with kitchen knives and just use them to cook. I mean, sure, there is a number of people who probably do that. We need to do the same exact type of education with this. And it's going to start somewhere, as dark as it is.
It reminds me of just privacy concerns in general. You know, a lot of people, if somebody, was trying to have a discussion about privacy concerns, but both people aren't aware of how bad it really is and what the implications are, then you can't really have a discussion about it. And so I don't think it's any different from that, where, if anyone here cares about privacy, but you're talking to someone and they don't seem to care at all, what's missing there is their understanding of what's actually happening behind the scenes. And once you can explain that, then you can have an actual discussion about how to solve the problem. So it almost sounds like that would be a good starting point of actually citing how bad the problem is, so everyone in the room can at least acknowledge, okay, yeah, this is a problem. And now we can talk more about what his solutions look like.
And to add to that point, I think the difficulty here is with privacy. It's a bit easier to actually be able to express this to people, right? You can show people, see, this is how they take your data out of your phone. Or they could be like, hey, see, this is exactly the kind of thing that happens where you go to that link and see this network inspector in your browser. This is the kinds of data that they upload. It's bad. You can actually visually show some of this stuff. But with CSAM, you kind of can't. That's sort of what makes this very difficult, is that nobody wants to see this. It's horrible. And
you can just cite numbers, I suppose, stats.
You can cite numbers, but when you get to the point of, hey, there is millions and billions on the internet, then that's a number so great that it's incomprehensible to our reptile brains that unfortunately we don't understand. And I think that's where it gets really difficult. So that's why I think it's a dialogue like mental health. We just have to talk to everyone and understand and be able to sort of have these difficult conversations and hopefully read more news articles that are authored by these women's rights and children's rights organizations and hopefully get a better understanding of the situation.
I guess on this note, I guess the regulation side of it, chat control has been a big thing. And you can expound on maybe what happened last week and why it's kind of died down quite a bit. I am asking this question all the time because I've been doing coverage for chat control. I'm doing coverage for age verification. I'm doing coverage for all these different issues happening globally right now on the channel. And I just am so lost on some of this regulation. Some of it just seems stupid. Like a lot of the stuff that comes out of these US states, I'm just like, okay, this is clearly some person who's never used a computer. And this just sounded like a good idea on paper and they signed off on it. And they just do not understand even where, because even if that was their goal, like if their goal was to ban VPNs, if their goal was to be repressive and do all these crazy things, that's still not like the bills themselves and how they're written aren't actually going to accomplish those things. And like anyone would be able to tell them that. Yeah. But on the other hand, you know, I'm still conflicted. Like people who are trying to pass chat control, people who are trying to break encryption, do they have ulterior motives? Are they using this child thing to get what they want, which is something different? Or do they just genuinely care about this topic? They're all in the room and they agree on this child problem. They just don't understand the implications of what it would mean to ban end-to-end encryption. And everyone just kind of disagrees on whether or not banning encryption is part of that solution. I don't know if you can speak to a litmus test based on especially your time speaking to a lot of these people.
Okay, it's very complex. So I'll start by saying that I think the answer is yes and no, because when we talk about groups like European Commission, European Parliament, they represent a very vast spectrum of political parties. For those of you living in the United States, Europe has a multi-party system where it's not just two parties. We have multiple parties all forming coalitions and sort of representing everyone all at the same time. There is no two-party battles going on, so to speak. And I think this is very important because when we talk about the European Commission, we sort of sum everyone up into this tiny little narrow slice of an organization thinking, oh, that's everyone. That's what everyone in the European Commission must be thinking, but it's not. And European Commission consists of some incredibly talented and smart people, at least based on my personal experience having interacted with them at the Digital Markets Act team. And they have experts with PhDs in computer science. They are not politicians. They are experts in their own domain. Law, computer science, whatever have you, whatever it is that they're going to regulate, they have experts in these topics. So that straight off the bat is very different from a bunch of lawyers sitting around a table trying to decide what it is. They actually have people who understand what's going on, and they consult others who understand what's going on. They consult the civil society and human rights organizations and women's rights organizations. And if they're in doubt, they talk to digital rights organizations like EDRI. If they're in doubt, they talk to Free Software Foundation Europe, like folks like Lucas that you interviewed. And I don't remember if you had the chance to speak to Jan Penfrot from EDRI. Mm-mm. Amazing folks that they basically bring into the room to have these conversations. So long story short, this is a very divisive topic. And the way it was packaged when it was presented was literally, if you look up the name of chat control, which is just an alias that we've given amongst privacy conscious folks, but the actual name of the legislation is to prevent the distribution of child sexual abuse or whatever. Like they just named it in such a way that if you say no, it just makes you sound like you are one of the bad people. Like it's just the way it was packaged and wrapped already from the name and the get-go is just a little bit hostile, which should rightfully so sort of raise the sort of like awareness and maybe ring the alarm bells a little bit to wonder who it is that proposed this. If I recall correctly, and it's been such a fucking saga with roller coasters of ups and downs and who pitched it and then who shape-shifted and then who added some new segments to that thing. It's like, it's a mess. But if I remember correctly, the initial party from Denmark who proposed this said, hey, we should do something like this and pitch this idea. One of their key political members of the party who pitched this actually got arrested for child sexual abuse related issues. So that should tell you everything you really need to know about what's going on. So someone should look this up and find the links, or I can just try to send you a link and give you a better idea of what's actually going on here. It's quite ironic. So with that in mind, I don't know if the key goal here was to, in fact, keep kids safe. At least maybe for that person, it wasn't. But it's very important to acknowledge that there are so many people, as a part of the European Commission, as a part of the European Parliament, as regulators, as civil society orgs, as women's rights orgs, whose goal 100% was to keep kids safe. That is undeniable. That being said, when chat control took its new evolved Pikachu to whatever crazy monster form it took, it turned into a bit of an interesting surveillance legislation that took a really strange turn and a really strange shape, where initially it was pushed out by religious and conservative parties, coalitions in Europe, which sort of made it a bit easier to track down who it is that actually lobbied for it. And to spare everyone the legal complications of how lobbying actually works in Europe, there are some protections in place to make sure that there is no corporate influence in European politics. But needless to say, it is not sufficient to the extent that you would expect. And I can give you one personal example of this from the Digital Markets Act, where every single Digital Markets Act hearing that I went to spend 7 hours in front of a camera talking and yelling at Apple lawyers, there were a bunch of rights organizations, air quotes, who were there to essentially just repeat Apple's marketing taglines. And we realized that those rights organizations were actually entirely funded by Apple. So sure.
I remember seeing one of these that they put out these like really formal looking PDF reports on why European legislation was harmful to like Apple users. I think it was maybe in the context of Google search. Like they were showing Google search results and how they have to have these pop-ups in Europe that don't exist in the US. And we found that users were 30% more dissatisfied. And we care a lot about this topic and we think the Europe should back off. And but when you looked at who funded it, it was big tech companies. Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. But it's a thing.
It's good, but that's the thing. So essentially that's how it creeps in. And it has the shape and the face of a rights organization. XYZ, fill the blank, but it is in fact behind the scenes funded by a tech company. When we looked at, out of curiosity, who it is that is actually funding the organizations pushing for these chat control-like issues, one of the key names that showed up was Thorn. And it keeps coming up, this name, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's a company that was initially funded by Ashton Kutcher, and it was a startup that specializes in utilizing AI tools to scan images in video to detect CSAM. And they are essentially a CSAM scanning company. And if they could, theoretically, lobby to make this happen in Europe, and messengers were required to scan these messages, there are no bigger service providers out there who could theoretically handle the volume. So it would be Thorn who would be handling this, and they would be making millions from this. So needless to say, Thorn was quite often and very frequently and vocally involved in lobbying for things like this. There are other organizations that I don't think fully understood what was going on and lobbied for it without fully actually understanding the context of what it would entail. But I think, again, it boils down to this communication issue, right? Like there weren't enough technical people in the room to sometimes explain, hey, in order to do that, you have to just break the whole world's encryption and just make everyone insecure. And that's not a solution. That's just to give you a little sample taster of how some of this came to be. And eventually, when you talk to enough people and name the legislation in a specific way and talk about the topic with the framework of protecting kids, I think it makes it very difficult for people to have these conversations at scale until everyone's in the room and they can anonymously and maybe secretly push the vote no. But if you go to the corridor and the halls of European Commission and want to have these conversations with people, then they're a little more hesitant. Or the European Parliament, they're a bit more hesitant because they're like, hey, like, I don't want to say no, fuck protecting kids. We shouldn't break encryption. Like, that's not what anyone wants to say. And that's not their view either. Everybody wants to protect kids. The point is, not everyone wants to break encryption. It's that conversation, the nuance of it was lost in a lot of these conversations. And it's a very nuanced and very difficult problem of how it came to be. And it took a very different shape. And eventually it got to a point so serious that in some countries, the parties that were secretly pushing to make this happen and the conversations that were secretly happening behind the scenes, not so secret, but secret as in the context of behind the scenes, the public doesn't directly engage with. It took really interesting shapes. Like defense ministries of certain countries got involved. They were like, hey, maybe this is not a good idea. Like months before this happened, the Swedish military and the defense ministry said, hey, we're going to start using Signal. And then a few weeks later, someone else from the Swedish ministry said, hey, we will like to support check control. And then the Swedish defense was like, what? No, like we just said we're going to use it. We don't want, wait, hold on a second. And it just really complicated situations. And that should go to show how complex the issue is. So all this is to say, it took a very interesting shape. And I ended up running around trying to talk to as many regulators as I could within my reach in the languages that I could speak, in the fluency that I could communicate with. And it's a very difficult topic that I don't want to make mistakes and have it get lost in translation. It was very difficult, and there aren't that many experts who can talk about these things or have the connections. Maybe they are the experts, but they just don't know how to reach out to those regulators. So it's very difficult, very nuanced, and it took a while, man. I mean, Meredith was in Brussels. I think she was in Amsterdam talking to all these people as much as she could. She was going to all these seminars. Like I was talking to as many people as I could. I'm sure folks at Proton were doing the same. And Tuta were doing the same. We were all engaged at what capacity or another, trying to do the right thing. So it took a while, but I think we managed to convince the right people to have the right conversations, to sit down and say, maybe this was a bad idea in the first place. And I think there are very few people who could take more credit than people like Patrick or people like Marcel from the Pirate Party, who did their very best to try to explain the reality of what this would entail and made magic happen. So, and there's tons of people who I don't even know their names of. Someone created a stop chat control website, I think from Denmark, and everybody used that to send these emails to the European Parliament and European Commission. Whoever you are, you an amazing anonymous person, thank you for making that website, because that's basically was the tipping point, I think. And one person single-handedly made it possible to fight this battle. So it's very complex. And I think it's just the fact that it's a very difficult topic to talk about made it very difficult for everyone to engage in it also.
Yeah, so last week, it was about 1 or 2 weeks ago, Patrick kind of cited it as mostly dead. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So can you explain the most recent update very briefly?
So essentially this last week, what happened is there were 2 votes held. And to the best of my understanding, the one on Thursday was final, and the European Parliament essentially killed it. That's to the best of my understanding. And yeah, that's at least the best of my understanding. But again, this is one of those topics that it will come back. I can tell you already, like, this is not a final win. This will need to be drafted into every single independent country's laws to say you cannot compromise on people's privacy, and it is their human right, it is their national right to respect their privacy, yada, 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 and it cannot be altered with. It should be in law, codified in law, for it to never be possibly brought up again. Even then, the European Parliament might try. Certain parties might try to push their agendas. It could happen. It's been, in this particular case, the right wing and the Christian Democrat parties, and tomorrow it could be someone else. But point being, for now, we're good, to the best of my understanding. And on the verge of learning that, we thought maybe now is the right time to launch our sharing features, because we've been waiting very long and thought, okay, like this is the right time. If there's ever a better time, it's Thursday when they announced it. They announced that it's dead, and an hour later we released sharing. So we were literally waiting for it.
Yeah, one quick note. I've seen on my end, it might swing a little bit, plus or minus 5%, but I've seen chat control, encryption bans, all this stuff proposed from both sides. I know that you mentioned right quite a bit in yours, but like in the US, I've seen left-wing politicians pass, or try to pass it. I've also seen in Europe some people on the left also try to pass this kind of stuff. So I just wanted to make that clear, because again, another thing, back in the forum days, there was a lot of like pointing fingers of like right versus left, and like someone who was right wing would point at the left wing people and say this. And it's like, well, actually, this other bill in like the neighboring country is from the other side. Like this is a pretty like bipartisan thing.
The important thing, though, I think it's worth mentioning these things because if you voted for the Christian Democrats or any one of the right-wing parties, first of all, I have utmost respect for you. Vote for whichever party you want to. That's the beauty of the European governing system, is that we are all represented, right? But the important thing here is you should also know if you want your privacy rights to be respected. And if it is your representatives who try to push this, then I think you should know, be it left or right, who pushed for it. And there are amazing websites where you can go check out who pushed for it, and you can log in and take a look at it, and you'll find out that this was mostly the case in most countries, at least in the Nordics. And it's very easy to see.
Yeah. And I liked also Patrick, he put out his blog, and then shortly after he said, like, now we can actually focus on keeping children safe. I think his overall point he was trying to make was so much of the air in the room was taken up by chat control. And a lot of the technologies that they were trying to use for chat control weren't even evidence-based. Like 50% of the times, or even more than 50% of the times, they were just false positives. Yeah.
I mean, you can't do client-side scanning. It just doesn't fucking work. Like, so
yeah,
I don't know what anyone's talking about.
It's cool how now he's saying, like, now we actually have that air. We can all kind of reflect on this problem. And so maybe it's good timing as well for this podcast for us to kind of think about this.
I mean, I think so too. If you're a regulator, if you're one of those political parties, and if you want to have this conversation, please reach out to us. I'd be more than happy to sit down and talk about the reality of encryption and how that keeps you safe and everyone safe and your constituents safe, and how revoking encryption is not going to help you or your constituents or kids for that matter. People are still going to keep doing what they're doing. They're still going to find ways to encrypt this stuff if they want to do that. So,
yeah. Why? Because when I first started getting to know you, you weren't really active in the legal side of things, as far as I know back then. So even like I'd say the last few years, you've been getting a lot more active on the political side of things. And I just wanted to briefly ask you about that. I know we have casual conversations all the time, but I've never had to like directly ask, hey, John, why are you doing this? So I'd like to, did it just kind of happen organically? Did you start getting into this? What's the value you see in that? And can you shed a little bit of light of what it looks like to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all,
and what you're doing, I guess. I'm not even saying what you do. So you should probably expand on like what you've been done. And
I don't love it. I'll start with that. I've never seen myself as someone who would ever wear a suit and sit in a room. And yet I caught myself doing that in a way that I'm like, fuck, like, what am I doing? Why am I wearing a blazer? Why am I wearing a suit? And I'm just a nerd, guys. Like, I'm a coder and I come from a technical background. This was all new to me. And I think what started all this was 2 years ago when the whole Digital Markets Act related issues started to happen. And you and I had this video, actually, funnily enough, I think I can attribute the day that I got dragged into all this shit pretty much to that video that you and I made about Apple trying to block web apps in Europe under some false premises. Little backstory is Apple said, hey, we're going to kill all web apps in Europe. Basically, Apple said, we're going to kill web apps in the EU. And they tried to use...
They didn't even say. They just pushed out an update that killed it. And people
they just said that they just killed it. They pushed down beta, and they were going to kill the companies, and they were like, hey, you know what? We're just going to do this. And the false excuse they used for that was that they were saying, hey, in order to comply with the Digital Markets Act, we have to do this. And I was like, what kind of a bullshit act is that? Let me go read that shit. They're going to kill my company, you know? And I had to sit down and read, and I was like, nothing in the Digital Markets Act says that they need to do that. What the fuck is that about? And then I started reaching out to a bunch of organizations, and by some amazing miracle, I connected with two incredible dudes from Australia who started open web advocacy, who were trying to advocate for the open web and for essentially to get more browsers and browser engines in iOS. That's apparently what triggered Apple to say, hey, if you want to have other browser engines on iOS, then we're going to kill web apps, even though that is a complete bullshit argument and there was no security benefit, no nothing. And Open Web Advocacy and myself involved, we published an open letter to Tim Cook saying, don't do this. And within 48 hours, we got 5,000 signatures from every single big tech organization you can imagine, to every single engineer from every company you can imagine, small and big. Everyone said no. And Apple immediately backed down and said, maybe we're not going to do that, but only Safari should be able to install web apps and stuff like this. And whatever. That was my first unexpected foray into the legal side of things with Digital Markets Act. And that sort of got me directly that affected me directly and got me involved directly, because I have a small company that was going to be very directly affected by this. And effectively, that act would have made or break my company, so to speak, in a very specific manner. And I reached out via the Open Web Advocacy to the European Commission to say, like, hey, like, what's going on? Can we have this conversation? Can we talk a little bit? And they were incredibly kind and incredibly amazing. And they've actually invited Open Web Advocacy in every capacity that they can to engage with us, at every capacity they can, almost weekly. We had calls with the European Commission trying to understand what we can do, how we can fix things, how we can remedy things, what would be a good compromise, what would be a good solution, what are some things we're happy about and not happy about. And we had years of these conversations almost every few weeks with the European Commission, and also with the UK competition market authorities and with the Japanese ones. And it slowly became a thing where at first I started helping out the folks at Open Web Advocacy because I was directly impacted and my livelihood was going to be directly impacted by it. And in the process of doing so, I ended up making a lot of trips to Brussels. And over the course of the years now, I've been there enough times that I got to meet all these incredible people from these amazing organizations like Lucas from Free Software Foundation, or Jan Penfrat from EDRI, or Bruce from Vivaldi, and Kush representing Mozilla, their policy person. There's been incredible people that we got to meet over the course of these years who have been working their butts off every fucking day trying to do the right thing for our rights. And it's just incredible. The atmosphere is just really uplifting and energizing, because you walk into that room and you realize you're surrounded by all these other people who are trying to protect your rights. And everyone's got your back. And that sort of dragged me into this a little bit. And I've realized over the course of the years in doing this, I don't think encryption alone is going to keep us safe. I can say as much, that it's not a magic bullet. I mean, it's a dual use technology, but it is not, and it's a controlled export good, but it's still not going to protect us, in that you can have the best piece of mathematical formulas and encryption that you want. If someone says you're not legally allowed to use it, good fucking luck. No company is going to be able to offer it. And maybe you can try to do it open source and GitHub will take it down, or someone else will take your website down. I mean, if someone says this is not cool legally, you're not going to be able to do this. And I realized, okay, so encryption's a big piece of the puzzle, but not the only piece of the puzzle that we need to focus on. And I realized, okay, like, web is another big piece of this puzzle, because if we lose the web, if we lose the openness and interoperability of the web, we're also fucked. Because if we depend only on the app stores, you've seen what happened to ICE report apps in the United States. You've seen what happened to, I mean, it's super weird, right? In the United States,
in Russia, China,
VPNs in Russia and China, exactly. And the irony of the situation is, in the United States, if you ask Apple, they would say, hey, we want to protect kids. And if you look at their App Store guidelines, they will say that they will take down anything that harms people, yet they've continued hosting Grok, which literally is used for creating CSAM, and they didn't take it down. There is an amazing Verge article I highly recommend.
Oh, I thought you were going to reference what the alt store guys posted on Mastodon.
Exactly.
They're like,
I was getting to that.
yeah. You can explain it.
Yeah. I over the course of going to Brussels, I met these incredible folks, Riley and Shane from the alt store, and they've created this beautiful piece of alternative app store for iOS devices. And they made an amazing app that only shows you a yes or no, basically. And it says which of the app stores have CSAM on it, and allows apps that creation of CSAM. And believe it or not, it is the Apple's App Store and not the alt store. Yet those were exactly the kinds of shit that they've accused alt store of distributing potentially. And that's why they wanted to have some notarization process so they can take a look at which apps are being distributed through the alt store, yada, yada, yada. And the irony here is, it's so weird, right? Apple says, hey, we want to protect minorities. We want to protect kids. That's why we have all these policies. And they don't take down Grok, which is used for creation and distribution of CSAM. But then they declared people who work for ICE as minorities who should be protected. And then they took down ICE reporting apps. The irony here is, these are grown-up men with fucking guns. I don't think they need your digital protection. I think they can protect themselves. Versus kids who are being abused, on the other hand, whose sexual abuse is being distributed on your goddamn app store. cannot protect themselves with guns, so maybe you should take down Grok, but they don't. And I think the open web is very important for this reason, because we don't depend on these app stores and what they decide is okay and what they decide isn't okay. And I don't use the word decentralization lightly here, because I think web isn't exactly decentralized either, depending on where you host your website, right? But web is still not necessarily party to these big corporations. Like, you can choose to host your website somewhere else where that corporation cannot decide who gets to have a website. So I think web is a big component. That's why I think it hit the right nerve for me. And I said, I need to get involved and do something to protect the future of the web so that it's not just these fucking app stores. I don't want Apple or Google killing the web. Encryption's a big portion of it. I want to make sure that we protect it. And I think in order to be able to do all those, you kind of need to have these legal conversations. And that's sort of how I became more involved into all this legal situation, how I got dragged into this legal situation, let's say. And I realized I can hide behind my keyboard and just code, or go there and try to do some change as much as I can by talking to people and show my face. And I had to get a good haircut for that. And the old one wasn't doing it. And now I have to put blazers and suits on, and I have to sweat for 7-8 hours, but that's okay. It's worth it.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty frequent realization for some people. A person who's just comes to mind right now, just on the fly, is Louis Rossmann, right? Louis, you know Louis?
I don't know him, but yeah.
Yeah, not me neither. But he started just kind of making these tutorials about something he knew a lot about on YouTube. Right, which is just repairing Mac. Like I watched Louis Rossmann back when he had like a very early channel, like back when he was smaller than we are right now, because we just hit 300K. So I think I remember watching him when he was at like 200K. Thank you. Yeah, we were actually in person for it, recording a project, and then we hit 300K. So we made a little like cake.
Nice.
We wrote. Did you see the photo on Mastodon by any chance?
No, I should look.
Okay, check it out. We made a little cake. We wrote 300K on it, and it was a great cake.
Well deserved. Amazing content.
Yes, so. Thank you. But back then it was just tutorials. Like, I was just fascinated because he would show like how to repair this like one component on a Mac. He would explain like the specific things that Apple didn't want to acknowledge as real problems. He's like, but I've had this repair at my repair shop in New York come up on literally every single person when they hit year 7 on this specific MacBook model. And so he was kind of sharing this detail, but he never talked about right to repair in the way that he might do now. So, he went from just making these kind of like interesting videos to then talking, and he started doing more like talk show style videos where he started, talking. He's like, here's why you need to get active in this bill. I'm so tired of Apple. It was becoming a little bit more on the advocacy side of things. Yeah. But now, like, I don't know how much of air quotes right to repair was started by or even advanced by Louis Rossmann single-handedly.
I mean, I'd say 90%.
I'd say a huge amount of it was like
huge amount.
He was the person who exposed me to the concept of right to repair. He was the one who started like introducing me to these bills, and then his audience starts following this as well. I like to think that what we've been doing the last year at Techlore is quite similar. We started with a lot of like privacy tools, like, oh, this is more private than this, but it's like, oh wait, they're actually just trying to ban encrypted tools. So we can still have those discussions. That's quite fascinating. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really fun to invite. I mean, I've had Session on this podcast. I've had SimpleX on this podcast. They both think the other one sucks. It would be really interesting to get a roundtable discussion between all of them and see like what they think. I think it would be like a well-moderated discussion. And they're both really nice guys. So I know that they would be very professional.
I'll just say this already. Proton's awesome.
It would be good. I need to get Proton on the podcast, actually. But I'm like, this doesn't matter. Like, it does matter because I find it technically interesting. And I'm sure like that still deserves a place. But I was putting so much emphasis on that when really we were missing the whole picture of like, well, these tools are only allowed to exist. And people already talk about how hard it is to just move to Signal. Like, Signal is feature parity-wise quite similar to WhatsApp. Like, you have stories on Signal. Yeah, I would argue better too. And now we're talking about getting people over to Session or SimpleX, which the usability is far worse than Signal. I have no issue saying that. So that's already kind of an issue. But then, okay, let's set up a situation where encryption's just banned. So now you have to convince your friends and family not just to move to Signal, which apparently is hard enough to do for a lot of people, and it is. I have this problem as well. You now have to convince them to use an illegal tool along the way. Like, you really think that's a healthy environment?
Yeah. No, and maybe compile it themselves and not get it from the App Store, side load it as they call it, and find ways to install
what do you mean, you idiot? You didn't build your own Signal source code for, Linux ARM, which they still haven't done, by the way. I'm very frustrated about that.
Which is, I am extremely frustrated as well. I don't know if you've seen, but I switched to all Chromebooks with great pleasure.
With Android apps and running and
yeah, I mean, it's
Android
amazing.
apps and then Linux apps on there as well.
Yeah, you can run Linux apps, you can run progressive web apps, you can run Android apps. It's actually, if you think about it, the most accepting platform. Everything runs on it.
In some ways, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, except you have to deal with Linux ARM.
I mean, so far it hasn't been that bad. I mean, even our development tools are all working great. So like, I can safely say that like we shipped it with Chrome OS, and I'm really happy about it as a web app developer who makes web apps, and I don't have to use Apple products for stuff anymore. It's really good. After having shit talked them so many times in these hearings, I feel like it's going to be really nice to flash my Lenovo.
I saw one of the new Microsoft laptops. I don't know, their lineup confuses, because I think I still associate the Surface as the crappy little piece of crap they released the first time, but It's grown a lot. It's like genuinely really nice hardware. I think it's the Surface laptop. It is kind of like MacBook Pro build quality. It runs an ARM chip, the Snapdragon X. I don't think it's as good, but it's still okay. So the hardware is getting there, but dude, when the hardware's out, Linux still isn't there. Yeah. This is very 100%. Off topic. So let's get back on track.
On topic in that I think all this was made possible by incredible folks like Louis Russman, initially taking their time to engage with the legal process and making it so that the right to repair movement caught the right steam and caught the right momentum and basically said, hey, you know what, maybe we should do something about this. And then we started getting computer manufacturers like Framework and System 74 or 76. I forget their name because I'm bad with numbers. Yeah, it's honestly, it's like it's all made possible by folks like this pushing the limits of what's possible with regulation. And I realize just how important that is. And I'm trying my best in the best way I can, spending our funds as much as I can. So if you're spending money on Cryptee and you have a subscription, all of it is going to this shit. And essentially, we're trying to push the boundaries of what we can do with our legal team, our tiny, small engineering team, and me making trips to Brussels, trying to talk to the regulators to defend your rights. And I can tell you the same about Vivaldi. If you use a Vivaldi browser, they're trying their very fucking best to do this in the same exact way. And this is really important, is what I'm trying to say. And Signal's doing the same. Meredith is flying out every now and then trying to represent Signal and encryption and our conversations, privacy as a whole. I have immense levels of respect to these people for doing what they do, because I know firsthand just how difficult it is to actually do and live out of luggages in hotels. And aside from the inconveniences, if you have to keep doing it and grabbing drinks with these people, it gets really tiring. You know, at our age, it's not that easy to keep getting tipsy and talk about privacy all day long. So, not that I don't dislike it, but it's hard to convince the right people.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have.
This has been a very no filter podcast.
Yeah, but it was a little more filtered than the last one, I think. The last one was quite
unhinged,
all over the place. Unhinged. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Great. Well, I'd appreciate anybody's thoughts in the comments. Obviously, keep in mind the sensitive nature of what we're discussing. Even if you firmly disagree and you're like, I think this child stuff is nonsense and I think encryption is, be respectful about it, because, keep in mind the context of how sensitive this conversation is. People in the comments might have people personally affected by this. I tried my best to treat this as sensitively as possible. John clearly did as well. So I just ask a little bit of compassion and kindness as well, because I don't want to have to shut down. To this day, there's our intro video on our channel, I think, doesn't have comments in it because it's an intro video. But I want to keep the comments open to still have people discuss this in a productive way. So that's all I ask.
Everyone, I think the most important thing we can do right now is to engage in civil conversations about this topic, because just ignoring what all these people trying to protect kids are trying to say is not going to work. We can't just close our ears and say, I can't hear you. I know you're trying to protect kids, but I can't hear you. It's just not going to work out. We have to have very civil conversations around this. And we can't ignore what they're saying. And we're not going to make compromises on encryption. I promise you that. No one is going to. None of the privacy respecting, security respecting companies that you hold dear to your heart, like Proton or Tuta or Signal. We're not going to make compromise, but we also have to have this conversation, and it's going to be a difficult conversation. And I hope that you would be as civil and as open-hearted and open-minded about it, because there will be people in the comments. Statistically, there will be people in the comment section who are going to be personally affected, who were going to be personally affected, who may be actively affected. And I sincerely hope that you will respect them. And I sincerely hope that you will understand that it's a very nuanced topic. It's a very difficult one for them. And these people who have these conversations in public and talk about their incredibly dark traumas and experiences, they make incredibly difficult sacrifices to have these conversations and make these possible. So I hope you can respect that as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John, for your time. I know that I told you beforehand this would be 80, 90% informational, but still, good. You know,
this is exactly
in light of, and also, but like, congrats on the release. I know this is something you've been cooking for a long time. So
thank you so much.
I guess if anyone wants to check that out, you can, I guess you have to be a paid user, but there is Cryptee that has shared photos. So I don't know if there's cards for, I think there are cards for external links, but we'll leave it in the show notes. Yeah, there you go. It's funny too, because what you see here isn't the format even that is done in post in Riverside.
Oh shit!
It's quite funny.
God damn it! I've scratched all sorts of body parts. We'll find out how that looks like.
Well, thank you, and I'm sure we'll be back on at some point. And until
Thanks,
then,
guys.
keep up the great work.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Henry. Deeply appreciate you all.
Yeah. And there you have it, everybody. I hope that we all learned something today. I know I did. This is a very new territory for me, and I didn't really have the full terminology nor understanding of this topic going into the interview. And it's clear that John has done a lot of his research and has talked to a lot of very experienced people to be able to share what he knows with us today. If you enjoyed this interview, definitely leave a rating down in the description. I'd love to hear any comments you have, as long as they please are sensitive given the nature of what we discussed today. Thank you all for watching this Techlore Talks, and I'll see you next time.